Hello?
Hello.
We currently have about 86 people that have signed up. Just give them 1 or 2 more minutes before we can start. Hello?
Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Okay. Hello.
Hello?
Hello? Good morning, everyone.
Good morning or good afternoon.
Good
no, it's
afternoon.
Anyway.
Oh, it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, this is CIPM, Nigeria. Okay.
Yeah?
Thanks for joining in. We are live from the CIPM Secretariat. We're going to start in a minute. Today, the essence of this webinar is for us to be able to make contribution to the Nigerian Labour Law Review. Good afternoon, everyone, once again. This is the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management of Nigeria. The essence of the webinars today is for us to be able to make contribution to the Nigerian Labour Law that is
I have a current message. I'm wondering if that is a current message. No.
we recognize the fact that our members who are under the umbrella of CIPM Nigeria are the major implementer of the Nigerian Labour Law. And we know for sure that this labor law is going to have a significant impact on how we carry out the practice of human resource management in Nigeria and beyond. So this afternoon, we have our panelists. We have our panelists on ground, and I'm going to do the introduction very briefly. I have Dr. Esen Efana Okon, who is a member of the Institute, Mr. Femi Mokikon, also a fellow of the Institute. We have Mrs. Ifoma Adeniyi, a fellow of the Institute. We also have Dr. Balarabe Aliyu, who is also a member of the Institute. And the last but not the least, now on the list of our panelists that we have today is Mr. Adewale, who is going to be the moderator for this webinar. But the list is inexhaustive as we are still expecting others to join in. We have Mr. Bimbo at Lola, is going to join us very soon. So we're still expecting him. So for our participants, we would like you to use the Q&A button below your screen on your Zoom projector. You see the Q&A button there. Any questions you want to ask as the discussion is going to go on, we'd like you to use that button to put in your comment or your suggestion, any question that you think you want to use. In addition to that, a survey link was sent out to our members, and we have quite a lot of responses as regards what are the critical or burning issues for HR practitioners in our different organizations. These questions have also been put together, and some of them are going to form the basis of our discussion for us to kickstart while we hold on for questions to come in for discussion as we go on. And at this point, I want to be able to assure every participant, everyone that has sent in their contribution, that we're going to take cognizance of everything that has been sent, and we're going to use it to be able to make our contribution to the Nigerian Labour Law review that has been called by the Federal Ministry of Labour to be more robust and more inclusive. I think on that note, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Adewale Jones, who is going to moderate. Thank you very much. And I hope we enjoy the session as we go on. Mr. Adewale Jones, please, over to you. Hello, Mr. Adewale. Hello, Mr. Jones.
Huh? Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear?
Yes, sir.
Hello? No, I said that looking at the responses from those who sent in their views about the current laws that we have in Nigeria on labor and employment, it would appear that the emphasis is on just one aspect of the law, which is the Labor Act itself. I have been privileged to read the Labor Standards Bill 2018, which is one of the laws that will be replacing the Labor Act. Labor Act, from what has been put together, will probably end up being fragmented into about 3 or 4 laws. One of them is the Labor Standard Bill. This is not the first time this is happening. From my experience, we had done something like that around 2001 to 2003. But I just want to spend a few minutes to look at the content of this bill in relation to the existing set of laws that we have. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm going by the fact that the comments that have come from the survey sent out by the Institute, sent out mainly on the Labor Act. I think we should spend these 2 hours talking about the Labor Act itself. And that Labor Act is encapsulated in the Labor Standards Bill 2018. So you can see that a lot of things are going to change if eventually this bill becomes a law. One of the things that ILO has been talking about since about 1999 is the fundamental principles of employment. And that is being adequately taken care of in this new proposed law, or the bill that we have before us. Those principles center around issues bordering on freedom of association, freedom and right to collectively bargain, prohibition of worst forms of employment, issues bordering on, just a minute. Issues bordering on, freedom of association, like I said, right to organize and collectively bargain, Forced Labor Convention, which is the 1930 convention. Nigeria is giving some vent to that in this new bill. Abolition of Forced Labor Convention, Minimum Age Convention, Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention, Equal Remuneration Convention, and finally, discrimination, which we have always talked about. Some of us will remember that there was a time that people were clamoring for the president to sign the Disability Act. So all of these have been incorporated in this new bill, which for me is a good thing. But again, like we all know, this is a proposal, so there are still so many areas that we need to look at. One other thing that I'd like to mention is the fact that there are some new areas which we have talked about for some time, some of which even the National Industrial Court has had cause to adjudicate upon and make its views known. One of them is the issue of sexual harassment. That is well taken care of in this new law. One other aspect of this new law, which I need to draw attention to, is that unlike in the past, when you had a situation where employers, or if you like, yes, employers would deliberately not comply with the provisions of the law, and the penalty was basically only fines. Now, the law is providing for not only fines, but also jail terms. So what it means in effect is that for those of us who are in charge of HR in our respective organizations, if eventually this bill becomes law, we need to take proper care so as to ensure that we do not only comply with the provisions of the law, we also do not do things that will end up in our employers being fined, and we as HR people who are in charge going to jail. I have also looked at some of the questions that have been asked. Some of them border on some of the things that have been taken care of here. Some of those questions are general statements that will not necessarily go into a new law. There are issues bordering on implementation. And one of the things that we need to also understand is that over time, we have had problems with implementing the existing labor law because the Ministry of Labor that is saddled with that responsibility has not been up and doing. The ministry rarely visits companies, and even if they do, they are always interested only in products and bound envelopes and things like that. But again, I think to ensure that this new law, if it's implemented, is giving some teeth. We have another bill, which is titled, actually is a labor institution bill. That's the title of the bill, but it has three different aspects. It has one aspect that has to do with the setting up of the National Labour Council. Another one, the Office of the Director of Trade Unions, which is already taking care of the Trade Unions Act anyway. And of course, the third one has to do with the issue of arbitration, conciliation and arbitration. What will happen at the end of the day is that the current Trade Disputes Act will have to give way for this particular bill if it's passed into law. The same way, the Trade Unions Act will give way to a Collective Labor Relations Act if the current Collective Relations Bill is passed into law. But what is important in all of these that I need to draw attention to is the fact that the segment that has to do with the National Labour Council, mind you, we already have the National Labour Advisory Council, which is a tripartite body, but has been moribund, if you like, dormant for a very long time. Now, the proposal is to have a National Labour Council. This is going to be like an ongoing council, unlike the one of the past, when meetings were held only once in a year, if at all there was any meeting. Now they're going to have an office in the Ministry of Labour that would house the National Labour Council. There will be membership drawn from government, from labor, from employers. And in that council, part of their powers is to implement the law. That's why it is one of those aspects of the Labour Institution Bill, is to implement the new law, to ensure that those who are supposed to comply with the law, comply with the law. Why I'm saying this is because some of the questions that have been asked in the last couple of hours or days, which the CIPM management has shared with me, some of them border on non-implementation of existing laws. And to that extent, if we have a separate commission, which also will include employers, include labor, I think that will do a lot of good to the implementation of the law. And some of the issues that we have with the current law will probably be reduced. The other point again is, all of us must also know that some of the issues that have been raised in this survey are not issues that will necessarily go into the law in a codified form. They can come in by way of ministerial regulation. which means when the labor inspectors come around, which they should be doing, and they've not been doing very well, they should use the templates containing those regulations to check what is happening in the places that they visit. I think that so that I don't waste too much of the time, let me allow some comments from other panelists before we begin to look at specific issues. Is there any panelists that want to make a comment? Hello? 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 Hello?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Hello, sir. The other members of the panel can hear you.
Hello?
Hello? I said, did you hear my earlier comments?
Yes, we heard you.
Come on.
We heard you, Mr. Adewale.
Hello?
We heard you. We heard you.
Yeah. We heard you.
Dr. Ali, you can go ahead and make your contribution, sir.
Right. Okay. I was just wanted to make sure that everyone could hear me. But yeah, I think Mr. Adewale has actually done a good overview of some of the issues arising from the reviews of the labor bills. And I think really what we will do afterwards is kind of go through it segment by segment and pick key items which we want to do a deep dive on. One thing he mentioned, which I wanted to reemphasize, he mentioned that there are several other bills actually before the National Assembly. So even though a lot of the comments and survey questions that have come in seem to be focused around the Labor Act, we have to also be aware that there are several other bills, particularly the Collective Labor Relations Bill and the Labor Institutions Bill, which are also significant bills that affect the Trade Unions Act and the Trade Disputes Act as we know it. I, in particular, I'm very, I spent more time looking at the Collective Labor Relations Bill, which essentially seeks to replace the existing Trade Unions Bill. And the reason for that is that this is really an area where the Nigerian labor relations space requires more clarity and more regulation. If you think about all of the trade disputes we've had related to either trade unions seeking to get into areas where they don't have jurisdiction, or even in some cases, conflict between trade unions. And then if you think about all of the strikes that sometimes have been called indiscriminately at short notice without either the trade unions or other stakeholders involved in that dispute going through the necessary due diligence and protocol before you actually declare a strike, you will know that that area requires significant enhancement. So I've seen some provisions within the draft Collective Labor Relations Bill that seeks to provide more clarity around one, the jurisdiction of trade unions, which was established in the 3rd schedule of the Principal Trade Unions Act, such that, say, for example, if you're operating in the oil and gas industries or in the finance industries, there are specific unions for those specific industries, and you do not have a prevalence of different unions operating within the same space. So that's one. The other thing that that bill seeks to do is also to strengthen the collective or the trade dispute resolution processes by establishing bodies and a framework whereby if there is a dispute between two parties, say an employer and the trade unions do not just declare an indiscriminate strike action, say the next day. They have to go through some protocol around declaring a strike action. So there is still the legitimate right to go ahead and carry out a labor action, but then you have to follow through those protocols. So those for me are really significant pieces of legislation that we need to pay attention to and contribute to the development, because it will clearly impact all of us at work. It will also impact the general public, who tends to be impacted by when you have an indiscriminate strike action. So I just wanted to point out that there are several other bills out there, and we should pay attention to others, not just the labor standards bill. So thank you for that introduction.
The reason why I said what I said is actually because we have only 2 hours. And if we go by the responses that have come from our members, they center majorly on the labor standard bill. Were we to have more time, of course, we will look at all of these bills. But in 2 hours, 700 and something participants envisaged, it may be difficult to look at all of them in one fell swoop. But I also note your comments about the collective labor relations bill. I quite appreciate the stance we have taken, but I also want to mention that even under the current law, there are still procedures to be followed before strikes are called. The point is, over time, some of these processes are not followed, and nothing happens where there are violations. And one of the advantages of this new set of prescriptions that is being proposed is that violations also will lead to incurring jail sentences and things like that. Maybe that will help to checkmate all these things. And like I also said, that labor institution bill, which is setting up a commission, will also help in a way to help in promoting the observance of some of these provisions. I agree with you that we need to look at all of the bills, but we don't have too much time. As we speak, after that, maybe we should concentrate on the area that people have responded to mostly.
Yep, thank you. Any other comments?
Are there other comments from panelists before we throw the floor open?
Hi. Mine is just, just to contribute. Because I went through the Occupational Safety Bill that replaces the Factories Act, and I think there are a couple of things there just to emphasize for us to think about and to move towards having an alignment. So I hear you. We don't have time to touch everything, but maybe if we take more of the more common comments and areas, if there's opportunity, I think it would be very useful to also make some comments about some of the things we see in the other bills that are being proposed. Just to reiterate what you said, yeah.
Okay, so do you?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Adewale, and all the other contributors. I don't know if you are hearing me. Are you hearing me?
You have a specific comment?
Are you hearing me?
Okay, yes, so, I can hear you, Femi.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to add to some of what you people have said. I think the CIPM members and fellows, we have a unique opportunity to make our impact felt in this particular review process. And the way I'm looking at it is, we need to look at the review at 2 stages. It looks like our focus is more on this draft that have been submitted, which some people have had access to. I think the draft is the final stage, or maybe close to the final stage. The first stage to me should be those of us who are in the field practicing. What areas do we have concerns with, in which we have found that the existing laws, the extant laws, have not been able to make adequate provisions? I'll give you a good example. The reality today is that we still have cases of casualization in many organizations. We have recent development in the areas of outsourcing. Our outsourcing does not in any, as far as I know, there's no specific provision anywhere that regulates the activities of outsourcing companies or protect the interests of outsourcing companies or have a bridge between the two. So I'm thinking we should use this opportunity of a review to ensure that either the Labour Standards Act or any of the ones that have also been put on the table make specific provisions that will look, because the future of the world is tending more and more towards outsourcing. There is therefore no reason why we shouldn't have, I won't advocate for a separate law, but let's have it within the existing framework to accommodate this practice that is a reality on ground. And I believe we can identify several other areas that we as practitioners, we feel there's something to be done. I give you another example. For instance, maternity and paternity. Different Lagos state government, for instance, they have a different regulation as far as maternity is concerned. This exists, the draft that we are looking at apparently makes provision for, I think, 4 months. And if there is a multiple child or multiple births rather, 6 months. I'm asking myself as an employer, of course, it's a desirable thing and it's a very sensitive area that one needs to be a bit careful about. But let's look at the implication. Employer employs somebody and for 6 months, this individual is not at work. Will such an employer be encouraged to continue to employ such people without running foul of some of the basic principles that were referred to earlier on? One of it is non-discrimination. That is one aspect. Now, going to the draft that we have with us, I looked at the definition section there. I think there are some areas that need to be looked at. For instance, one of the areas I have issues with the existing Labour Act is the fact that it is only applicable to workers. The provisions of the Act are applicable only to workers, and workers, as defined under Section 91, does not include several people. I'm sure you are familiar with this. I think that is the thinking behind changing the Labour Standards Act from worker to employee, with the hope that employee will be given a broader definition to include all those who have been excluded under the existing law. But interestingly, the new standard that I'm looking at has a definition of employees and also has a definition of worker, lifting almost verbatim the entire definition that was in the old act. And also, the definition of an employer has been modified a little bit, different from, because I used to argue in the past that the legal teeth that outsourcing companies have today derives from the definition of a worker in the Labour Act, because it says an employer rather. Employer is somebody who can employ for himself or for other people. This one has removed the new definition of employer in the new Labour Standards, has removed that aspect. So I think some of these things need to be looked at. First, let us articulate. I want to believe really that some of the surveys will have covered that bit. What are those areas that we have lacuna today, where the existing laws did not make provisions for? Good example, outsourcing. The language that will be used will then be left to those who will draft the act or the law, and then it will become law. So this is what I want to say for now. Maybe as time goes on, as we make further contributions.
Maybe I should just make a quick comment, please. If you look at the Labour Standards Bill, for example, all through the bill, there is hardly anywhere where the word worker is mentioned, except in the definition area. All through, they were talking about employee, employee, employee. So what it means in effect is that definition section defining worker, the same way it was defined in Section 91, for me is redundant. And that's one of the things that we need to take out and we'll do attention to. And if you look at Section 2, this is Section 2 now. Yes, Section 2 of the bill, it says this act shall apply to all employees, all, except employees whose terms and conditions of employment are governed by other specific laws for the time being in force. There is no employee whose terms and conditions of employment is governed by other laws, other than maybe people in the armed services and what have you. But the fact remains that all employees will refer to all juniors, all seniors, even contracts, outsourcing, any form of employment, you will be covered by this law, one single law. That's my own understanding of the new plan. So the definition aspect, which has to do with worker, is redundant, and that has to be taken out. Attention will be drawn to that in the process of compiling the final report to the appropriate quarters. So can we continue? Is there any other comments from other panelists before we go to the floor? Comments from panelists? Are we satisfied that we can then throw it open to other participants in this webinar?
Yeah.
Okay. So
yes, we can, and
okay,
we can encourage participants to also type in the chat so that if while the conversation is ongoing, we'll take time out and look at if there are any questions in the chat and address them in the panel.
That's good. That's good. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ali. So it's open now. If there are people, Mr. Tilola, if you are there. Hello, Bimbo. You are there. You want to make a comment before we continue?
Yes, the comment I would like to make.
Say again?
The comment I would like to make.
Okay, okay.
That I have the privilege to look at some of these bills. I think the bills themselves are already outdated because most of the provisions therein have been overtaken by events, by contemporary events and development. For instance, the provision that seeks to amend the Labour Act, that seeks to repeal and replace the Labour Act, most of the provisions in the bill itself no longer represent current thinking, and there are some emerging developments and trends in labor and employment services which ought to be captured by that bill, which are not so addressed. For instance, the dichotomy between contract staffing, outsourced staff, and other non-conventional employment relationships.
Yeah, can I just, Mr. Atitola, can I just interrupt there and ask that you adjust your mouthpiece? Because everyone on the line is saying they can't hear you.
Oh my God.
Your mouthpiece, yeah, the mouthpiece is supposed to be brought, yeah.
Oh,
okay, that's it. Yeah.
Am I better?
Yes,
Yeah,
much better.
I think so, yeah.
Am I clearer now?
Yes, you are.
Okay. The point I'm making, thank you for this opportunity once more. I've had the opportunity before now to take a look at the provisions of the bills as it were. And my comment is that even the provisions themselves has already become obsolete and devoid of contemporary relevance. And why did I say so? If you look at the bill that seeks to repeal the Labour Act, its content itself, the content of the bill itself, does not sufficiently reflect emerging trends, developments in labor and employment law, including the challenges in labor and employment law space today in Nigeria. For instance, if you look at that bill, there's no provision that seeks to define specifically the benefits and the rights and privileges that inure to people in non-conventional employment relationship, such as people in outsourced employment, contract staffs, casual staffs, etc., etc. One would have thought that because of the uh, various long controversy that has surrounded the legality or otherwise, including the what should be the appropriate legal regime that should apply to these categories of staff. In view of those controversy that has been on for some time, one would have expected that the bill should have a provision to specifically address it and provide a legal framework that regulates these employment, special employment relationship. So I think that bill has to be revisited to make it more encompassing. I think that's my preliminary observation as far as the proposed amendment to the Labour Act concerned.
Okay.
Now,
Thank you very much, Bimbo. What you can also then do for us is to maybe itemize the areas you think will need to be revisited, where the lacuna is. Maybe you want to tell us those things that we need to include that are currently not included in the draft that we have. One of the things that I would like to put on the table before we continue is perhaps to even change the title of the bill, because it's not really a labor bill per se, it's also an employment bill. So I would think that it should normally be an employment standards bill, but if you want to include labor, it should be labor and employment, because a lot of the things that you have there have to do with employment. And employment is a much stronger, even if you look at the UK, where they have labor and employment side by side. Employment is more enduring, and I think that's the intention of this particular bill, if we go by the section 2 that I read earlier. So if it's employment, let it be termed an employment standards bill and not a labor bill, as it were. And if we feel that labor should be included, it should be labor and employment standards bill. That's just an opinion that I have. So any other comment before we throw it to the floor? Hello?
Hello?
Okay.
Hello?
Okay, Ma, go ahead.
Yes, please. Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
I agree with the contributions made so far, but I think we'll have to look at the fact of the technological advancements in the labor space as it is currently, and factor our contributions towards that. Looking at the fact that people would like to work visually, unlike before when you have to report to work. Now you can work from your home. If you factor that in, and also the fact that the
Go ahead. Hello? Okay. Hello?
think we have lost her. So
I think we have.
Yes,
I think we'll just proceed. Maybe we should then proceed to taking the questions or comments from the audience by way of chat, and then we can respond to them. Are there questions that are coming?
Yes, we have questions.
Hello?
Sir, you can look at the questions.
Okay, should we resort to those we had before?
Yes, then we also have questions coming on. Whichever one you want to take first.
Okay, let's resort to the ones we had before.
Okay.
That were sent to the secretariat. There's this question that says that just a minute. There's the issue of paternity leave, which is the vogue in the West and also in some parts of Nigeria today. At least I think I know one state government that has introduced that. So that's one area that somebody has commented on. Are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
So go ahead.
Okay, I was just talking about the fact that we will look at the fact that the current law does not cover the technological advancements that we have currently, and we have to look at that and bring it to speed. Am I off? Hello?
Yes, we are listening.
Okay. I'm bringing it up to speed with what is currently happening and the fact that the changes we are seeing in the workplace is very, very fast. And hello.
Are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, have you finished?
Yes.
Okay. Gentlemen and ladies and everybody, I need to just draw attention to something again before I forget. I think that from some of the questions I've seen here, and I'll give examples, training bond, the issue of are
you okay?
It's breaking.
But this is the internet. Whatever, can you do it?
Yes.
Allow me connect to this thing. That's why I'm leaving my phone here with you.
Can you hear me? Of the law, anyway. Whoever is supposed to ensure that people exercise their rights under Conventions 87 and 98. And Nigerian laws currently today, without any amendment, is very clear of union membership. So that is a different matter entirely. Then you have issues of pension deduction and non-remittance. That's more like implementation. It doesn't need to go into the law. Then you have issues of flexible work, which is what Ifeoma has just talked about. That can be looked at. Then leave entitlement. But the main point that I want to also raise is that labor and employment laws do not rest only on legislation. They rest on quite a number of things. They rest on, number one, you have, apart from the common law, the rest of the Constitution, which is the gun norm and the major something. They also rest on ILO conventions, which we must try to bring into this current exercise. All those conventions that ILO has passed and Nigeria has ratified, we should try to bring them in. And then they also rest on collective agreements, because not everything is provided for by law. What is provided for by law is the minimum. They also rest on HR handbooks in organizations. They rest on customs, conventions, and traditions. And of course, they also rest on judicial decisions. If you look at training bond, for example, there's a nice pronouncement on it, which I would regard as part of Nigerian law. Even if it is not included in this legislation, there's a judicial pronouncement on training bond, as far as I can remember. So I also want us to bear in mind that not everything will go into this set of laws. Some others will have to be taken care of by these other avenues. Thank you. So, any other comment before we throw the floor open? Because some of the things here that I'm looking at, no union representation, maternity, staff promotion. How much can you do in the law on staff promotion? That is difficult. Organizational structure is difficult to bring that within the ambit of the law. Leave administration, employee confirmation and probation. The law itself has said you must confirm within 6 months. So I don't think there is anything we can add to that. That's my view anyway. And then you have, is there a right for a private sector employee to go on strike? Of course, there's a right to go on strike, but then there are procedures to be followed, even in the existing law. Then annual leave. Someone is talking about most of them are leave days provided by law. That may be difficult to decree. They have already provided the minimum number of leave days. So there can be an improvement on that based on collective bargaining and agreements within the various sectors. That's why we have industrial unions and industrial sectors. Anyway, are there other comments? Most of them are just hanging there.
Going by some of the comments we have seen in the Q&A as well as in the chat, I think a lot of people they've either sent in comments or responded to the survey based on the existing laws. And what is apparent from some is that people haven't seen the draft bill. So I think
they need to see that.
Yeah, an action item, what we'll do after this is, we'll probably put it somewhere on the CIPM website or make it available for members. Draft bills that are under current review right now, make them available to members so that they can view them.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Hello, Mr. Adiwali. Yes. Are you hearing me?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just
Please go ahead.
I need this clarification. This review, there's a tripartite body, labor, employers, and government. Now, whatever contribution any of these parties will make will be driven by their own unique interests. For instance, all the unions will be canvassing for positions about labor. Employers, I guess, as represented by NECA, will be looking at these laws from the point of view of the employer. Government is government and is also employer. They also will be looking at it from their own side. I'm here asking myself, as CIPM, what position are we taking? Because there are some of the provisions there that certainly will be in favor of the employers. Some will be in favor of. How do we draw a balance? Because I see a lot of members of CIPM representing both employers and workers. What are the issues that we need to look at carefully in terms of the stakeholders or particular unique interests? And I go back to what Bimbo was talking about earlier on. I wouldn't want to say that the entire provisions in the current bill are already outdated. Yes, I think we have that opportunity, which was the point I made earlier on. We have the opportunity now to identify all those areas where we as practitioners, we believe that there's need for improvement. Itemize them. We may not be able to put them in the language of what the law will be, but somebody else will do that, and those are the draftsmen. So we need to be able to come up with a list and say these areas are not in the current law, we need them in the current law. Or these areas are in the current law, we don't need them. I also want to add that the current Labour Act, 91 sections to the Act, whereas the draft that I saw has about 61 or so, which means about 30 sections have been totally eliminated. It is important to know what these 30 sections cover that are no longer relevant in today's statute. Thank you very much.
Hello, Mr. Femi.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Adewale Jones. Hello, Mr. Femi.
Yes, yes. Bimbo,
Well,
I'm with you.
I'm quite happy to listen to your very useful comments, and I would like also to make some additional comments on that.
Okay.
On the first issue you raised, the issue also crossed my mind as to being a tripartite arrangement involving three parties of divergent interest. Now, as a professional institute, CIPM, what stand do we want to take within these three interests, which are not, which appears to be diametrically opposed to one another? The interests of workers, the provisions that seek to protect workers may not be acceptable to employers' body, or a provision that seeks to protect the employers may not be acceptable or may be felt to be oppressive to the workers. And the government, both as an employer as regulator, we also have a position. For me, I think CIPM should try as much as possible to lean in favor of what we consider to be best practice on the individual issues. And I give you an example. Our maternity laws under the Labour Act currently, Section 54, if you look at it, is obsolete in the sense that there are a lot of issues that may come up under maternity law which are not addressed by that provision. For instance, what happens where a pregnant woman suffers a miscarriage or a stillbirth at a time when such woman has commenced maternity leave? Is she entitled to continue and finish the 12 weeks leave, or must she return back to work after losing the baby, for instance? What of the question of adoption cases? Are we to expect that in adoption cases that the mother will equally be entitled to 12 weeks maternity leave provided for those covered by Section 54, which specifically relates to natural mothers? So as CIPM, in my view, what we should be looking at are provisions, stands that represent best practices and not necessarily a stand that is considered favorable or acceptable to the workers, to government, or to employers association, because as an institute, our membership and our stakeholders are drawn from both employers of labor and employees, including public sector as well. Then furthermore, I think Mrs. Ifema also mentioned this. The few questions that I've seen coming from members here clearly show that they don't seem to appreciate that it's not every concern that can be addressed by way of having a legislation. Furthermore, the questions that have come in, most of them also clearly show that our members are not even aware of the current positions of the law. Because if you know the current positions of the law, your questions should reflect that, and be agitating for an improvement or a removal of a particular provision, etc., etc. So I think as an institute, we should first and foremost generate a kind of highlights of the current Nigerian labor legislation. What are the basic highlights of the Labor Act, the basic highlights of the Employees Compensation Act, the basic highlights of the Factory Act, the Pension Act 2014, Labor Act, etc., etc. Then we just oppose it with the current provisions under the emerging bills. Then members can now comment that this improvement appear acceptable, this improvement appear not acceptable, or member can spot what they consider to be a lacuna in the current laws, which has not been addressed in the current bills. Because as it stands, most of these questions relate to issues which are not suitable for legislation, but instead issues which are more suitable for contract of employment of parties, including the company's employee handbook. And like Mr. Wale Jones had earlier pointed out, a few of the issues being raised have been settled by case law. For instance, on the question of employment bonds, there are at least 5 decisions of National Industrial Court on the validity of employment bonds, and most of them have suggested or ruled that employment bonds are legitimate and valid, provided the terms and conditions are reasonable and fair to the employee. So these are my comments for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. So maybe we look at some of the comments that have come in from the chat. Can I ask Mrs. Ifoma, can you just mute your Zoom when you're not speaking? There's an echo coming from there. Yes, thank you. So there is a question here about what the provisions of redundancy are in the current draft bill. Well, I think, yeah, so I think if you look at the draft, which we said we would share so that other members can be able to view them after this call, the redundancy provisions essentially didn't change much. It still has the principle of last in, first out. However, it has additional clauses where it makes specific references to existing collective bargaining agreements. So, and then it also goes further to say where there are no existing collective bargaining agreements, it expects both parties, the employer and employees, to negotiate the redundancy terms that will apply. So the core principle of last in, first out, as well as informing the trade union or employees representatives, are all captured in the current draft of the Labor Standards Bill. Okay. And, now going through some of the comments and questions, there is a questions around
just a minute, sorry.
Okay.
On the redundancy issue, I think one thing to add is that the definition of redundancy has now been moved away from the section on redundancy to the definition section. I don't know if you are here. Are you with me?
Yes, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah, I said on the issue of redundancy, that the definition of redundancy itself, which was under the redundancy section in the extant law, the current Labour Act, has been moved away from that section and taken to the definition section. But the definition still largely remains the same.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
There's a comment or a question here about what the revised labor law says about minimum compensation.
The revised labor law. There's a new minimum wage, national minimum wage, and that one has a separate act on its own.
Yes, and if you look at the current draft in section 11, actually makes reference to that National Minimum Wage Act. So essentially, it's tying both together. It's saying, subject to the provisions of the National Minimum Wage Act, every employer shall provide payments not below the national minimum wage.
Exactly.
Clear tie-in inside the current draft.
Right.
Okay. There are several questions about maternity provisions. So if any of the panelists want to take that, people want to understand what is the current draft around maternity and paternity leave provisions, if any, in the current draft of the Labor Standards Bill. I think that is section 27 of the current draft. Is it 27? Maternity. Section 47. Section 47. So essentially, I think what is here is that the maternity leave provision, if you recall, it has been increased now to 16 weeks in total. So 8 weeks before confinement and another 8 weeks after confinement. That's the current provision in the current draft. An increase from the previous 6 weeks before, 6 weeks after. Okay. So again, this is one area where we've received a lot of comment because of best practice. I think globally, best practice has moved even beyond those provisions of 12 weeks, 15 weeks.
Yeah, let me just add to that, sir. Subsection 5 of that section too. Hello?
Yes, go on.
It says a pregnant female employee is entitled to 4 additional weeks of maternity leave in the case of a multiple birth.
Yes.
8 weeks before, 8 weeks after. That is already how many weeks? 16 weeks, 4 months. Now, if this woman is fortunate to have a set of twins, triplets, and so on, she will add another 4 weeks. That is 5 months.
Yes.
Thumbs up for our women. But the challenge here for me is this: if we are to be realistic, as I said earlier on, it's a very sensitive area. But come to think of it, as a young entrepreneur coming up with your own setup, you take in non-discrimination, so you have a mix. And then this woman goes on maternity leave for 5 months in a year. Comes back, maybe after another 1 year, she's lucky, she has, because we see it in reality. A woman can have 2 sets of twins in a row, even 3. In fact, these days, where people can decide how many children they want to have at a time. So I don't know. Yes, it's a welcome development, best practice. But in terms of practical implementation, what does it portend for? I'm sure you know what I have in mind.
Yes. Let me open the floor for other panelists to respond as well.
Right.
Thank you.
I mean, we are in alignment with the ILO convention, which is about 16. So that's fine. If there's additional provision to protect the women, then, I mean, I don't have experience in childbirth, but is to examine and advise as an institute how harmful this may be to the employer. I think we can offer further protection to the female employees. to ensure that, for instance, the period of your going to give birth does not impact your performance evaluation and does not have an impact on your progression in the organization. So those are some things to think about when I was looking at that. It's also important to note that what has been proposed is quite silent on the paternity leave, and to say something we want to take on, I think is an obvious omission. And if we are speaking about best practices,
very good.
We'll also be speaking paternity leave.
That's right.
Correct.
Good. Going by that, in my own opinion, I don't think there's a problem with the additional month for multiple births. Because if you look at what is happening in Europe, sometimes they give them up to a year vacation, maternity leave in some countries of the West. But we are not in the West. But we must also remember that our National Industrial Court today does not only look at Nigerian laws, they also look at best practices all over, and they have the power to do so. So I don't think this is really a serious matter, in my own opinion.
Okay. So I think as an institute, I think we'll provide input around doing some of those enhancements, including adding paternity leave or parental leave, as the case may be, into this. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Or now even parental shared leave, things like that.
Okay, going through the chat again, there are several questions around whether or not the draft labor bills have anything for gratuity or make any provisions for gratuity.
Well, I think I will respond to that immediately. If we look at what is happening in various industrial sectors in Nigeria today, gratuity is becoming unfashionable. There are sectors where they have agreed to discontinue gratuity. And if we recall, in 2004, thereabout, when government introduced, 2004, not even thereabout, when government introduced the new Pension Reform Act, the first one of 2004, one of the reasons government did that was because government wanted to discontinue with gratuity at the federal level. And they said that if you have an enhanced pension, that should take care of that. And that's why, from what I gather, new entrants into the federal public service today do not enjoy gratuity, except those who had been there before 2004. And I can also tell that in the private sector, there are sectoral groups that have negotiated the discontinuation of gratuity. So it is not likely that this will fly, because pension scheme or the pension arrangement is such that the employee is taking at least minimum of 10% from the employer on a monthly basis over the lifetime of his employment. So it is not likely that that can be pushed into the national law. More importantly, because government itself has discontinued gratuity.
Okay. Any other comments before we look at? Okay. Well, then the other big comments that we've seen in the chat and in the Q&A, and maybe Mr. Bimbo will help us on this one, is on the topic of termination without reason. And I know that you've written quite a bit in your journal on this one. So the question is whether or not the labor draft bills address the issue of an employer terminating without reason. Hello, Bimbo. Mr. Titola. Is he on mute?
Okay, let me respond to that. While this is, I know that the National Industrial Court has ruled on that. I know that the National Industrial Court is relying on Convention 158 of 1982, which provides for reason for termination. And that course, some time now, I think the last one was the recent one of the EcoBank case, where they said there was a bank case earlier where they said that if you terminate, you must give reason. The only challenge that I have is a prescription of the law as provided for, sorry, as pronounced by the court. The only challenge that I have is that I can't see where Nigeria has ratified that convention. You look at the third alteration to the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 2010, which gives NIC all the powers that it has. In section 254 of that third alteration, it says that the NIC has powers to pronounce or use conventions that have been ratified by Nigeria. And this particular one, in my own opinion, has not been ratified, but the NIC has resorted to using it. Maybe they are coming under the guise of international best practice. But the fact remains that it is something that we may need to push to put in the law, because we really need to protect workers in that direction. That's my view.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments on that? Okay. Right. So there is a question here about discrimination and whether the current draft bills have any provision around preventing discrimination in the workplace.
Yes, it does.
And the answer is yes. I think the fundamental principle.
Section 5.
Very clear definition around, in fact, starting from even section 4, where it says there shall be equal remuneration between women and men for work of equal value. So we see gender equality making its way into our labor laws. And then you also have section 5, which basically covers all of these major aspects of the discrimination criteria. So race, color, sex, marital status, religion, political opinion, national extraction or tribe, social origin, albinism or body pigmentation, as well as real or perceived HIV/AIDS status. So again, it's saying that no employer shall discriminate against any person based on any of these categories of criteria. So the answer to your question is that yes, there are strong provisions in the law around anti-discrimination. I think the other probably some enhancements that we would suggest would be in terms of physical disability. So although they have a provision in 5B, which makes reference to persons with disabilities, but I think it can be clearer such that, you know, employers will be required to have clear policies around anti-discrimination, including people with physical disabilities, where they can actually do the work. Okay.
Okay, can I make a comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Speaking about discrimination, and I know our law is quite clear on gender and gender-related issues and things that stem from there. So working for a global organization where there's a broader acceptability of different types of, if you like, gender or how people classify themselves, I think it may not be wrong to include a clause to be very clear, subject to the laws of the land, that if, for example, you have people working for you that say they are not men or women, however they wish to classify themselves, how do you treat them so that at the end of the day, you are not seen to be discriminating people as well? You understand what I mean?
Right. Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Hello. There's a question here. There's a question here on an employer who does not give employees appointment letter. Well, that is something that we have always had, because even if you look at the current section 7, there's a provision in that direction. And the proposed law, which is now in the form of a bill, is even saying within 1 month. So what it means at the end of the day is that employers are compelled to give some form of letter to indicate the relationship between them and whoever is employed.
Right.
So answer to your question is they are supposed to give appointment letter to whoever they employ.
Okay. Questions. So there is a question just after that. Is there any improvement to the minimum leave days in a year for employees or workers? So the answer is yes. The current provision in the labor law says 6 days minimum, but that has been increased in the current draft of the labor standards bill to 14 days. So there's a new minimum of about 14 days being proposed in the draft bill. Okay. I think we've talked.
Sorry. Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
Still
on the maternity leave, women protection. The proposed amendment is silent on one of the panelists has mentioned it before. A case where the woman adopts a provision for leave period for the lady to bond with the adopted or in a case where, like the case he gave, if the baby is aborted or the mother loses the baby at birth, would there be leave period? Would it be entitled to maternity? Hello? Hello?
Yes, I think it was breaking when you were, making a comment.
I heard you. Really, because this is also one of the best practices around anyway.
Sorry?
In some other parts of the world. The issue of adoption leave.
Did I make myself?
I've responded.
About adoption baby.
Yes, yes.
After birth or sometimes even before birth, yes.
You are very clear, and we said that it's something that we should put as part of the recommendation at the end of the day.
All right. Hi, can I just add something to what you said?
Hi, Doctor.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, in cases of adoption, the paperwork also requires the man to be involved. So if we are talking adoption leave, it should also cover the man in this instance, not just the woman, just to make that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see further questions. What should an employee do if appointment letter was not given within a month? Well, we don't know whether this will become law, but if it becomes law, like I said, there is a commission now that is going to be after the implementation. So maybe some representation can be made to them. And if that is not done, of course, the courts are still there. There's provision for grievance in the new set of laws. Procedure you can follow to hear your complaints and things like that. That should sort it out at that point in time.
Right. Are there specific provisions around diversity? So that's another question that came in. I haven't seen And I'll let other panelists respond. I haven't seen any specific provisions around diversity apart from the gender equality provisions we saw, which is really around equal pay for both men and women doing equal work. So is there anything else that addresses diversity in any of the drafts that you've seen?
Well, I haven't seen either. Yeah. I haven't seen either. But some aspects of discrimination, non-discrimination too, can come in there. But maybe for purpose of being specific, we can also make a recommendation around that.
Okay. Just going through to see if there are other questions we haven't addressed.
The issue of worker, like I said at the beginning, that definition there, which is copied verbatim from the current set of laws in section 91, should not be there because the definition has changed. If you look at the entire body of that bill, it talks about employee, yeah, not worker. And even in the areas of pay, it talks more about remuneration, except in one or two where I said wages. And I believe those ones are mistakes. Likely, they use the word remuneration.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, please. Any further questions?
Yes, I just want to read out a question. Mr. Adeyemi Adesanya said, since we just discussed termination, how do we respond to practices by banks, especially where employees are asked to resign their employment as against being sacked by their employers as a means of avoiding...
Again, no, you're too fast. Maria, you're too fast, bro.
Since we just discussed termination, how do we respond to practices by banks, especially where employees are asked to resign their employment as against being sacked by their employers as a means of avoiding compensation? They also use strong
but that has also been taken care of by case law.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So what can employees do to protect themselves?
There's a law behind that already.
Behind that, okay.
There are case laws.
There's a law behind that already because you can't ask an employee to resign. If somebody has done something wrong, you terminate.
Yeah. One of those cases actually is the case of Patrick Modili versus UBA. It's a case that says that asking an employee to resign against his will. Mr. Wale?
Yes, go ahead, Bimbo.
I said there are few cases on that. One of them is Patrick Modili versus UBA.
UBA, yeah.
Where the National Industrial Court held that asking an employee to resign against his will amounts to constructive dismissal. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah, another question. Will the law dwell on equal pay between locals and expatriates? From Richard Obechi.
What's the question?
Well, I don't think that can work. Going by my own experience, having worked in multinational organizations in the past, because an expatriate coming to your country is coming because that's the belief, to train people locally. More importantly, it's coming to a totally different environment, different from the environment he's used to. It's not used to the culture, it's not used to the tradition, to the food. So he's paid an enhanced sum of money to encourage him to take up that position in the country to which he's being posted. So from that point of view, expatriates are not usually, conventional practice everywhere, paid at the same level as their local counterparts.
Yeah.
Even if they are doing the same job.
Yeah, and I think
okay.
No, I agree with you. I think just to add further to that, I think one of the things you don't want to do is add provisions in the labor bill that constrain the mobility of labor. You know, you should we are now a global workplace. People in Nigeria or from Nigeria will work anywhere in the world, as well as other people coming out from outside Nigeria will come into work here. What is most important though is that irrespective of where you work, that there is dignity of labor and the ability to be able to take part in determining what those wages will apply in terms of collective bargaining where applicable. As long as you have that locally, you have to also be mindful that if you're bringing in experts or you're sending Nigerian experts out, you have to make the conditions such that it is something suitable for them to be able to take up that employment in the first place. So I'm agreeing with the points you made, just adding the
Another question from Tabitha Chukume is saying the definition of factory is not sufficient enough because a tailor shop will also pass for a factory, pass also as a factory. Hello?
Hello?
Yes. I just said Tabitha said the definition of factory should be reviewed as is not sufficient enough because a tailor shop can also pass for a factory from the definition we currently have.
Is that what? I agree with that.
The definition.
Personally, I don't know what my colleagues think, but I agree with that.
Okay.
We need to appreciate the fact that if a factory is not only a manufacturing concern, okay, it's everywhere where some work or activity is carried out. So if someone gets injured in a place of work, which is not really a factory, as a production or manufacturing setup, let us even say a bank. For purpose of the law, a bank premises is a factory. Any office is a factory. So, and that should be clarified properly. I agree with that point of view, personally.
Okay.
I don't agree with that view.
All right. Going.
Then another question from Ayodunu Kunle Alonge. He said, what is the stand on mental state and substance abuse? Are we allowed to subject employees to tests from time to time as employers?
Well, I think I should address that. In labor and employment law, it is customary to have employer carry out pre-employment tests, and in some industries, standard practices, including custom and practices of the industry, also allow that periodic tests are carried out. For instance, in the food and beverage and hospitality industry, before you come in, you do your pre-employment HIV test, including pre-employment hepatitis B test or other contagious diseases which may possibly, transfer to others through food that you have handled. So same test can be repeated in the course of your employment on periodic basis, maybe 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, or yearly basis as the law or customs of that industry permits. However, we should be very careful about having a blanket provision on the right of an employer to carry out post-employment checks. In my view, the standard practice which is in existence will suffice. For instance, custom and practice of the aviation industry expect that on periodic basis, psychiatric tests are carried out on pilots and on crew to ensure that they are mentally fit to fly. And similarly, in some industry, like I said, in food and beverage, the post-employment medical test to ensure that you are safe for their customers. But to have a general, a blanket provision allowing employers to carry out post-employment tests on employees may be intrusive and may not serve the interest of the workplace. So in my view, the regime that should be promoted is the regime of a restricted right to carry out post-employment tests, where the practice of that industry required so, or where public health consideration make it important. And if you look at the Labour Act, I think section 10 or 11 or thereabout, that section actually validates the right of employers to carry out pre-employment tests, which is the normal test. So we should be careful not to recommend a regime of blanket employers' right to carry out post-employment checks on employees. It's capable of being abused and it can be intrusive. Thank you very much.
I think I just want to add that the emphasis on the pre-employment examination is to determine fitness for work.
To work.
And the spirit of that, even as clarified in the Act, an HIV test should be voluntary. You should ask the employee for permission before you carry that out. To my understanding, it's not mandatory. But then going forward, it is good practice to get your employee to certify their fitness for work. It prevents you from a potential liability, because if your employee has an ailment or is in a particular state that can prevent him from functioning properly and the unexpected event should happen, it could generate a lot of problems for the organization. So it's best practice to do that. But even in that, things like HIV screening must be completely voluntary. And I think it's quite clear in the Act.
There is actually a law currently in Nigeria at federal level and Lagos State that generally prohibits, hello?
Yes, please. Yeah.
There is currently a law at Lagos State and at the federal level currently that prohibits pre-employment or post-employment HIV/AIDS test. And the only exception created in that law is where the nature of the role of the employee or the prospect justifies the need for such tests. So that does not need to be duplicated. The law is called Protection of Person Living with HIV and AIDS Law of Lagos State, and Protection of Person Living with HIV/AIDS Act at federal level. So the exceptions there is limited to those whose expected roles or current roles justifies such tests in the interest of public health. For instance, you are a nanny, or you have to be employed as a nanny, you are a nurse, or you are a kitchen assistant or a chef. Such tests will not be a violation of those laws. So there's a legal regime on that already in force.
And actually, the current draft of the Labour Standards Bill, Section 16, goes further to actually outline that same people around, no employer shall screen any applicant or test or terminate anybody from employment as a result of their HIV status. So you can see that they are trying to capture some of those practices already in place in the current Labour Standards draft.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. I have another question here. He asked the question on casualization common with multinational companies, whereby they employ based on locum or contract for 5 years, 10 years, without confirmation of employment. Is there any timelines for casualization of staff?
Well, I'm not aware of any timeline. I think really when you look at the provisions of the existing Labor Act and even the ILO provisions around unfair labor practice, manpower outsourcing, which is really where people have seen some sort of casualization practices. So manpower outsourcing as a practice is actually a legitimate business practice. So there is nothing in law that outlaws that, because essentially the person who is hiring the individual is an employer as defined by the existing labor laws. And the people he engages are employees or workers, as the case may be. But I think the point around trying to mitigate some of the negative practices we've seen in that space is making sure that where there is employment, the existing provisions or draft provisions, as the case may be, that seek to provide some protection for the employees are actually, one, in place, and two, enforced. For example, the right to association, the right to be able to bargain for the wages, as the case may be. Because if an employer hires these people, complies with the provisions in the labor law, and these people can actually unionize and bargain for their terms and conditions of service, then it becomes a moot point around how long they are providing that service, because essentially they're enjoying all of the benefits that the labor law has provided in terms of their employment. So this is down to, again, where you have provisions in the law which have not been either enforced or implemented. And we need to make sure, as these new drafts are coming through, some of those, first of all, the institutional framework we have around driving this is strong. And then two, the penalties associated with defaulting on those provisions are also severe enough to deter an abuse of human labor.
Thank you very much, sir.
Just to add to that, ma.
Okay, sir.
I think if we stretch the definition a little bit more in terms of how long does the law allow casualization, I will take Section 7 of the present Labour Act as helping us in that area, because it says not later than 90 days. An employer shall give to an employee, blah, 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 so on. 90 days is 3 months. So what I have always said is that although the word casualization is not in the Labour Act, that window of 90 days is what a lot of the employers resort to. And that is why you have in some manufacturing companies, every 88 days, they disengage these casuals and they take them on again and start counting another 90 days. In other words, recycling them, which in itself, again, is an abuse. Okay? I think it is a misnomer to describe outsourced employees as casuals. They are not casuals. As I said at the beginning, outsourcing has come to stay and it's going to be the trend going forward. In fact, I used to say jokingly when I was still in service that even the CEO's office can be outsourced.
Yes.
So there is no part of the business operation that cannot be outsourced. And in another couple of years, you may just be surprised that all this idea of, okay, non-call will disappear. And many parts of the operations will be outsourced. So I still feel strongly that if there will be benefit in this review, that benefit certainly has to come from focusing significantly on these non-standard employment relationships. Call it outsourcing, call it contract staffing, call it whatever. As I said, I'm not advocating a separate law for that. This same review can make adequate provisions that will address the concerns. I give you an example of some of what my friends experience and they share with me. Company A is asking Company B to give me 50 employees. Company B gives 50 employees. At the end of the month, company A does not pay company B to pay its employees. And they ask, I say, but you should have enough money to be able to pay them before we can pay you. And the young man who is saying I'm company B, maybe he just retired and he doesn't have the financial muscle. So there are challenges in this area. This review should be able to make provisions to ensure that the hands of the company A that is asking for employees, he knows what his obligations are, and he fulfills these obligations as and when due. I'm very happy that penalty today in the review is no longer just on fines, because the thinking in the past is that if you are fining me only 5,000 naira, why do I need to comply with the law? Now we are talking of jail terms. The question is, who is going to be jailed? The HR manager, the CEO, or the owner of the business? So I think this section 7 of the extant labor and the law helps us in that area. That 3 months has been reduced to 1 month in this revised version, which means, as I said, my own interpretation is that 1 month for casual. If at all you want to talk of casual, of course, there are some jobs that you can never ever take away from being. For instance, you receive a trailer load of sugar and you want to offload. You just call a few 10, 20 young boys to come and offload, and you pay them off, depending on the number of trailers. Anyway, if it's a huge a lot, that means it could engage them for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. After that, they are gone. Those ones will remain casuals, and that practice will remain with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Another question that we have here is, I think Section 55 of the Labour Act stipulating that a woman should not work at night is discriminatory. What are your views? Dear panelists, again, I also think this provision should not work at night. At night. Night work for women.
But that same section has exceptions.
Yes, there are some exemptions to that section.
You now said again, I also think this provision. There are some exceptions. Yes. He said, I also think this provision has outlived its usefulness because a lot of women now work at night without prejudice to the exemption.
Actually, I have an experience to share here. Hello?
Hello,
yes, when I was still in the system, I tried to enforce this law in one of the companies where I worked. You will not believe, it is the women themselves that I thought the law was protecting. They were the ones who came up arms in hand against me that why am I discriminating against them? If a man can work in the night, why can a woman not work in the night? But I think they seem to have lost sight of the thinking behind that provision of the law. I think the framers of the law then were a bit conscious of possibilities in the night. And that's why they say, okay, let's not expose these young girls or ladies or whatever to hazards of the night. Except, of course, those exemptions that the law itself has provided for nurses, very senior executives in the company and so on. So I think I agree with the suggestion that it has outlived its usefulness, because the women themselves, they don't want
even now, the new provision is that women, there is no discrimination now.
Yes.
Anybody may be engaged to work at night under Section 49 of this new bill.
Correct.
The only people who have protection now are pregnant women. So the pregnant women that are exempted from night work under the new bill. So, which I think addresses the obsolescence of the current law.
All right. Another question. What is the current provision of employability for handicapped job seekers?
Handicapped
job
There's a separate law. There's a separate law for that. There's a separate law for that. That's the
Disability Act.
Disability Act. Prohibition of Discrimination Against Disability Act.
All right, we move on to the next question.
Discrimination against Disability Prohibition Act.
Okay.
And we have also said that under Section 5 or so, yes?
Yeah.
Section 5, we will recommend that they include it in Section 5.1 amongst the other items that are prohibited there.
Under the principles.
Yes.
Under non-discrimination in employment.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Another question. What is the provision of the new labor law in terms of carrying out pregnancy tests and using this to determine employability? Hello?
But we're talking seriously. Why would a woman who is pregnant seek an employment when she knows that a few months down the line she will go on maternity leave? I'm just asking.
I mean, the fact that she's pregnant doesn't mean that she can't work. So, yeah.
No, but I'm not looking at the legal side. I'm looking at the moral side. Maybe a woman is 4 or 5 months pregnant, or even 3 months pregnant, and he picks a job. If within the 6 months of probation, going for antenatal many times.
This was why I asked earlier on.
I think that
this was why I asked earlier on.
Nobody should even present herself for work if she knows that she's already pregnant. Let's be sincere.
No. Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones.
Their rights.
Mr. Jones. That would.
Yes. It would do what?
Oh, her network is.
Okay.
You can't hear her.
It will amount to what? Discrimination.
It would amount to discrimination.
No, that's not discrimination.
It would amount to discrimination.
I'm not saying they should do a test.
Discrimination.
The test will be unfair. But if you see a pregnant woman,
you're asking why a pregnant woman should go and look for work, isn't it?
Yes. If a woman is pregnant, I won't employ you.
You know, opportunity comes once in a while.
Mr. Adewale Jones, let me answer your question.
Yes, sir.
Let me answer your question. Why will a woman who is pregnant look for work? She will look for work because she needs to make money to be able to support her husband so as to bring up the expected child or children properly and meet other obligations.
Let us be practical. If you as an HR person, somebody is looking for a job and she comes to you and you can already see that she's pregnant. I'm not saying do pregnancy test though. Pregnancy test for me is illegal. You can see that she's already pregnant. You are not likely. In my time as a child of HR, I will not employ such a person because I know that a few months down the line, she will go on maternity leave.
But she will be back.
Provisions in the law that will endure.
This is not theory. This is something that happens on a regular basis. I did it before, and what I simply did was to give the woman the offer of employment and ask her to go and deliver and come back to the Zoom.
That's right.
And she did.
Maybe because she has a special skill. She has a special skill that you need.
But she's qualified.
But if you have other people who can do that job, will you do that? Let us be practical.
There's nothing called special skill in this one.
Or maybe you had an interest in this particular person. Because if you have other people who are not so encumbered,
what do you mean by
give you the same service that
what do you mean by encumbered?
Who don't have any issue. I'm trying to see a situation where we should have a set of laws that are practicable, that we know that if you put them there, they will work.
You said earlier on that
people will not employ them.
You said earlier on that we shouldn't look at employers' perspective or workers' perspective. We should look at best practice.
Yes.
Hello, panelists.
So
I think from CIPM standpoint, to do an employment test, a pregnancy test as an employment qualification.
We are setting that one.
No, that one is settled. There's no argument about that one.
We have settled that one. Nobody's
There's
talking
no
about
argument
pregnancy
about that
test.
one.
Okay.
We are not talking about pregnancy test. We are talking
And it
about
should not
obvious
be
pregnancy.
used.
Yeah, I think really if a woman is pregnant and feels she wants to apply for a job, she should be able to apply for the job.
Yes.
You shouldn't overtly
I think
discriminate against her because of her
you do.
pregnancy.
I'm not saying she shouldn't apply.
You do pregnancy test when you are not sure the woman is pregnant. That's when you go and do pregnancy test.
I am saying
when you are already sure the woman is pregnant, that's the issue now.
That is what we are talking about. I don't even think we should do pregnancy test. Pregnancy test for me is illegal.
I think
Dear panelists, I think at this point, if someone is pregnant and is obviously pregnant, are we going to slaughter that at the altar of merit if the person is qualified? So as an institute, we believe it is discriminatory. If the person is qualified, he should be allowed to take on the job. And at the same time, a separate arrangement could then be worked out.
I don't think the institute is answering the question, no. If you are the one talking, Maria, what you are saying is not what we are saying. It's not what the institute is. The institute is not answering the question. We are not talking about asking somebody to do a pregnancy test. We are saying that if it is obvious, how do you put that in the law? It's a moral thing. If you put it in the law, will you compel somebody to do that person? Will you put it in the law? Is this something you can put in the law?
No.
Let me just
it's
ask.
at the discretion of the employer.
Even if she's pregnant. Say again?
It's discretionary.
You can't put that in the law.
Exactly. That is not part of what you go into the law. So I think at this point, can we move on? Can we move on?
Yeah.
Can we move on to other questions? So I also have here the doctrine of legitimate expectation of interest and detrimental reliance are now concepts that are occupying prime positions in our labor law, as this concept have severally formed the basis of cause of actions at the National Industrial Courts. Shouldn't this concept be included in the amended labor law? I think we've responded to that.
Let me quickly respond to that.
Okay.
The doctrine of legitimate expectation interest is an emerging concept in labor and employment law, which the National Industrial Court in Nigeria has equally given some recognition. But again, it is not every legal principle or every concept in labor and employment law that you reduce to a statutory provision. Case law has recognized that employees may have legitimate expectation, interest in their workplace, and same will be recognized by the court whenever employee seeks to enforce it. So I don't think you can have a statute that says employees' expectation interest should be recognized. No, it's a common law concept or a concept that has acquired the status of international best practice and which courts across the world are giving judicial recognition to. So I don't think it is something that we should reduce into a law.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, from now in the next 30 minutes, we're likely to round up, but I'm just going to be picking questions that have not been attended to. Every question that has been attended to, I'm going to leave them out. So in the next few minutes, I'm just going to call out the few questions. One of such questions is, what of protection of employees' data? We have data protection privacy. Most foreign companies transfer employees' data to overseas data server. So what do we have to say on that?
I can respond to that. Even Nigeria has the same thing in the form of a regulation. There's the NDPR, there's the National Data Protection Regulation, which is put together by the what do you call that? It's put together by the
NITDA.
NITDA, yes, NITDA. Nigerian Technology, whatever. So there is the NDPR, which is similar to the GDPR in the EU. It's more or less a copy of what is in the GDPR, which already protects that. I have flagged that already, that we need to make reference to that in the recommendation that we're going to make to the next, to the appropriate body, that we should flag that data protection regulation that we have in Nigeria. It's important to have that so that you can protect the data of employees.
Yeah, so but that regulation is already in force. So really, I think what you also want to do is to avoid duplication between either laws or regulations, as the case may be. As I understand it, to answer the question, if someone is going to transfer your data abroad today, I think there is a requirement for employee consent around how your data is being collected.
Of course.
So those regulations are already in force. If you're
That's exactly what is provided in that regulation.
Please go back and study them and spend time with your lawyers to understand the implications for your organization.
Okay. Thank you. Trying to scroll up through the question.
Any further question before we?
I think there's no new question. Yeah, there's a question around speaking about mobile workers, looking at the digital age of the fourth industrial revolution, which has started giving us a pointer to the fact that we're likely going to start having more freelance workers. It's saying, is there any protection for them? You now put the case of visiting lecturers captured on the payroll of more than one university in the case point. Our law must envisage the new ways of working. Any comments on that?
Personally, I'm not sure that that's something that should go into the law. If there are issues around that, that should be settled at the level of regulation, maybe coming from the NUC or whatever. It's not something that we can put in the law in regards to employment.
Okay.
That's my view.
All right. Any other contribution?
Just want to make a suggestion before we. That suggestion centers around what Bimbo said earlier. I quite understand that people are familiar with the current set of laws, and it's important for us to place the current set of laws side by side the proposed set of laws. In some areas, there is a repetition or a retention of the existing provision. In some areas, there are changes, and in some areas, there are cases of outright expunging of the existing law. So we need to try as much as possible to do a table. On the left side, we record all the existing laws. On the right side, we reflect the changes that are proposed in the respective bills. I think if we put that across to our members, they can understand what's going on better than the way it is today, because many of them don't have access to the proposed bill. So it's important to have that, at least for them to see what is on ground, even before we now come up with what we think the law should be in each of those areas. That's my view.
All right, thank you very much, sir.
I agree with that suggestion completely because, as I said, the current law has 92 sections, and this revised one has only 61 sections, which means 30 sections have been completely removed. We need to know what those 30 sections are and what they represent, and ask ourselves, is it that they are no more desirable that we are dropping them?
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. I think, Mr. Tilola, what's your take on this?
I also concur that we need a table of comparison. Like I said earlier, most of the questions coming from members actually show that most members are not even aware of the current law. And two, they are also not aware of the draft provisions. Because if, for instance, I imagine a situation where CIPM can send across a table as suggested by Mr. Jones, the current provisions, the proposed amendments, what we have expunged, what we intend to introduce. If that has gone out like 2-3 weeks before now, I can assure you that we will have had a much more engaging, a much more purposeful, and a much more objective-driven, purpose-driven questions. We won't be having questions relating to issues that cannot be addressed by law. I mean, in such a webinar session. But I think this is the first leg, and I believe there will be another session to deliberate on this when we have a table that members can speak to and have a more focused engagement on these provisions. Amendment of Nigerian Labour Law is going to be a continuous process. It's not going to be a one-day job. And we can also, there will be also opportunities for future interventions, for instance, during readings at the National Assembly. So I believe CIPM should do this comparative analysis, send it out, we collate members' observations, comments, do another webinar to address some of these issues, collate, and we can also engage further during public hearing. Lastly, but not the least, my brother, Mr. Femi Mukikon, raised a very important issue, which I think as an institute we should pay attention to. Whatever we collate here will be forwarded to NECA. That is my understanding. And some of our positions may not represent NECA's position. Clearly, as a professional institute, our opinion will reflect an hybrid of provisions that seek to protect both workers and employers. But I can assure you, NECA, as a pressure group, as an employer association, will only address or be concerned with provisions that protect them. This is not to say that they will not have regard for workers' rights, but they have mandates, and mandate is to advance employers' interests. So we should also, as an institute, come up with ours, which we can present to the National Assembly during public hearing, and having had contributions from our members in a future review or webinar like this. Thank you very much, sir.
So on a personal note, can we have comments from other panelists? Mrs. Ademili, can we have your comments?
Yes, please. I agree totally with the view expressed by the panelists that we should have a table of comparison between the old law and the proposed law. And also we should state out the areas that have been expunged from the old law. However, I'm concerned about the information we're getting. It's like there's a limited time within which to react to the proposed law. If we have much time, I think it's proper if we put it on the website or find a way of circulating the table to members so that we'll continue to receive comments and contributions from the members that would impact positively on whatever the outcome of this exercise eventually would be. I believe that if thorough work is done, it will help, because the labor workplace, the way we know it now, is changing very fast, and there's need to have guide in labor law issues. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ali, do you have any comments?
Well, yeah, thank you. I think this was really useful, even for me on a personal level. I learned a lot from the comments, and it was good to engage. I agree with the comments by other panelists. What I'll advise everyone from a practitioner standpoint right now is that this is the time for you to start to pay attention to these changes and also raise awareness internally. The last thing you want is for these laws to be passed, and then that is when your organization is playing catch up. So spend time right now internally, get a hand, once we put this out there, both the draft and the existing laws, spend time internally with your teams, with your legal reps, try to understand what would this mean if it is passed for my organization, and what do I need to do as a HR practitioner to help my organization prepare to comply with some of these provisions. That helps us all in our advocacy efforts. So thank you for dialing into this call.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Dr. Essen, can we have your comments?
Okay, thank you. I mean, in line with what everyone has said, there needs to be a deep dive, there needs to be fair communication at different levels, not only for organizations, but if you see what the law is trying to do, is a bit more exclusive, even on things like domestic workers. So there's a direct impact on the practitioner and the person. So we should spend time to look at it. Another good thing would be to isolate what the gaps are between the existing one and this new one, and then circulate it like everyone has said. So I think it's a very rich conversation. And by the time we collate everything tomorrow, we'll see what we come up with. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Mr. Adewale James.
Well, I think that we have started on a good note, even though like somebody said that the time is very short in terms of giving this matter the kind of attention that it deserves. But be that as it may, we can still make some progress in the direction of putting those things together. I also need to mention that I think it's important to bear that in mind, that even if we move everything that we have done to NECA, there's still going to be the opportunity of public hearing. I think that for those of us who have close contacts at the level of the legislature, we can still influence a few things there to the benefit of the employer and also the union. Like somebody said, our interest is to balance the two interests. But what is important actually at the end of the day is to have a set of laws that are just, that are fair, and that are in consonance with practices the world over. And laws must be robust such that no party in the relationship outsmarts the other or takes advantage of the other. And I think that's what we should be aiming at. So at the end of the day, our country will be the better for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Before we will close finally, I would like our participants to know that the survey link is still out. You still have the opportunity to just send in your views. And as I agreed today,
you didn't answer my own last comment too.
Oh, Mr. Mukiko.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I just want to appreciate this effort from the CIPF and to also add to the suggestions made earlier on in terms of this table that we are talking about. I think if it is possible, the ILO conventions, because now that the NIC is going beyond our laws to reference ILO practices or best practices built on ILO conventions. If it is possible to identify some of these ILO conventions that are applicable, I think they should be included in the table that will be sent to members. I also believe that this process should be an opportunity, looking at it from whichever side, to use our laws to help the government to achieve some of its objectives in terms of employment creation, for instance. I'm looking at a possibility of saying those job opportunities that we know that can be handled by Nigerians. Yes, let the law reflect that tendency. How it will be reflected, I don't know, but it's an idea. So we can use one stone to kill several birds. Review this law to promote employment, review it to promote decent work agenda, and review it also to protect the interests of the employers, such that at the end of the day, the kind of robustness that Mr. Adewale Jones talked about, we will be able to achieve it. I have personally benefited from this exercise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Mr. Adewale Jones, I also think we should release a caveat here, which is very important for the Institute, that the contributions made by individual members of this panelist, as at now, are individual comments and opinions, and does not yet represent the position of the Institute. So the position of the Institute on each item or subject will be published at the appropriate time by the Institute. So everything we have said here represent our individual opinions on the subject, and not necessarily the opinion of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management of Nigeria. I think it's important that that is clarified.
Thank you very much.
Very well, correct.
Thank you very much, sir. As I was saying earlier, we want everyone to send in their contribution. The link is still very much out. As an HR team, I think it's an opportunity for your team to come together. We sent out a mail for every organization to look at the bills and how it applies to them and send in their contribution. We are going to be looking at it as an institute to put together a CIPM standpoint. And as agreed at the panel, we are also going to be uploading the revised bill for those that have been revised. So please, the time is of essence. We would like to have them between now and 12 p.m. tomorrow. We are feeling another person, as it is very important for us to make sure whatever we are submitting as an institute is quite robust and represent our plans, so that everyone will have a voice, as it is applicable and as it can accommodate. Thank you very much, all our participants, our panelists, contacting you on a short notice, despite your busy work schedule as an institute, for your support now and every time. We do not take this for granted. Thank you so very much. And our participants are sending their surveys. We have over 700 that sent their registered. I know some of you are not able to sign up, but for those that were able to sign up, we also say a big thank you. We all hope for better Nigeria. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.